The canopy rattles like a tin drum, and the sky is full of metal. He's 21 years old, the son of a gas driller from the hills of West Virginia, and he has the newest fighter in the world wrapped around him like a glove. The P-51 hums with a predator's confidence. Its nose is long and gleaming, its prop sides chalk-white arcs in air that tastes like aluminum and oil. He calls her Glamorous Glen, after the girl back home who writes on blue paper that smells faintly of soap. March 1944. The 8th Air Force sends its bombers into France and Germany, long gray boxes in the sky, marching east with a grief that just hasn't happened yet. Their bellies are full of bombs, and their contrails are chalk marks on a blackboard nobody wants to read. The fighters gather around them like sheepdogs. This is the new game. Reach beyond the Ruhr, beyond the fighter fields, beyond the hope of the Luftwaffe. Strike and come home. The Mustangs make it possible. But flak is an old problem, and it does not care about new machines. The first hit feels like someone has swung a sledgehammer into the Merlin engine. There is no time to swear. A gout of flame rolls past the canopy, hot enough to slap his face through the glass. The P-51 bucks, the needles jitter, and then collapse into silence as if the aircraft itself has fainted. The pilot sticks with his ship almost longer than is prudent. He fights her, talking under his breath, because that's what people do when they're alone and afraid. Come on, baby. Stay with me. Just a little longer. The flames lick higher, burn the varnish into sickly varnish-sweet vapor. He noses her down, looking for the smear of a field between the hedgerows below. The altimeter unwinds. German countryside? Or is this France? Is a quilt too small to cover what it needs to cover? He kicks the rudder. The world goes crooked. Then he is out. The canopy snaps back. The cold is a slap that is also a blessing, because it means he has escaped the fire. The slipstream rips his goggles sideways, as if the sky itself is trying to blind him. The aircraft flickers below, a bright falling thing that was his world a heartbeat ago. He falls through the sound of the engine dying, which is a sound that is also a silence. One tug, one hope. The parachute blooms. He's suddenly a seed on the wind. He swings and watches friendly and unfriendly lines blur beneath him. The air tastes of fear and cold linen. It is oddly quiet, the quiet of being wholly alone, the quiet of a man suspended between a past he just left and a future he cannot yet see. Somewhere below, a dog barks. Further off, there is a thin, coerced cheering. The kind that follows a football team the day before the war starts. A spire pricks the sky to the east. A railway tracks toward a station whose name he cannot read from the air. He did not plan to be a tourist. He planned to be home before supper. He has a fragment of steel lodged in his thigh that will later whistle when he runs in winter. For now he does not feel it, because he is thinking of where the wind is pushing him, and where the men in field gray uniforms might be waiting. He hits hard. The ground comes up in a sudden whoop that drives a grunt out of his chest, paralyzing for a second. The chute sprawls like a dead jellyfish over a hedge, and he's dragging until he remembers to spill it, swallows, pulls, and the canopy surrenders its breath with a long sigh. He lies breathing in damp, green earth. Lavender and manure and burning oil mingle in a scent he will never forget. He is behind enemy lines. The sentence falls like a verdict. In the distance, trucks. Closer, voices, the clatter of clogs on a lane. He does what training told him to do. He moves, he hides, he becomes small. He peels himself into a copse of trees and fights with the parachute. Hands slick with sap and sweat, he buries silk under thorn and bracken. The pilot's world collapses to the size of a rabbit's, which is the size of his breathing. He inventories himself with a field man's pragmatism. A silk map with rivers like nerves. A compass that glints. A small steel mirror. A pistol. Chocolate that will taste like courage if he's allowed to taste it. There is also blood, stickiness that treats his thigh with rude attention. He presses it, it's dizzy, and then he hears the voices. French, he thinks, a woman. Another voice, lower, trying to be casual and failing. A word that he learned in a briefing. The way an actor learns a line he might have to say convincingly on opening night. Avian. He peeks and sees a child clutching a ribbon he tore from the sky. The boy is solemn, as if he has found a baby bird. A pilot is not a fool. He waits, tucked in leaf glitter and the smell of plant life breathing. He thinks of all the briefings on escape and evasion, of the warning that some will turn you over because money is scarce and torture is cheaper. He thinks of how many people inside all those tidy houses are brave, in ways most outsiders will never know. He is a long way from Hamlin, but he is also in a place he recognizes. The place where you do the next thing your gut tells you is right. He steps out and raises his hands. The woman's face is a study in terror, stilled at the last second like a deer. Then something in his eyes, or perhaps his accent, or the way he is both a boy and a man makes her say a word he understands in any language. Fast. She glances at the road and puts a finger to her lips, then beckons. The kitchen is so warm, it almost makes him cry. It is full of things he hasn't smelled since basic training. Onions braising in fat, wet wool drying by a stove, the rubbery tongue of a mop bucket. On the wall, a calendar is frozen in a month that is not March. The woman speaks to him in a burbling river of French that sluices around his ignorance. He remembers the phrase that is supposed to open doors. Je suis américain. He says it slowly. He says it like a prayer. Her mouth pinches with worry and resolve. The paired twins everyone born into occupation knows. She pulls a tablecloth aside and flips up a trapdoor under the table and takes him into the earth. The space smells like dirt and apples. He crawls, panting, and hears the trapdoor close, the table slide, the skitter of plates. Footsteps above, voices. German. A boot heel kicks the threshold of this French kitchen like a question mark and then keeps moving. A pilot folds himself around the pain in his leg and around the thought that suddenly arrives fully formed. If I live, I owe everything to people I do not know. Up above, the war continues with the sound of a truck stalling, with a laugh that doesn't belong to the people in this house. The pilot is in darkness that is not absolute. Somewhere a slat of light is trying to persuade its way into the cellar. He thinks of patience as a new kind of weapon. He is behind enemy lines. He is alive. And for the first time since the plane went dark, he realizes that his survival is now a communal proposition. His life has become a secret shared by strangers, and secrets have a cost. He sits with that knowledge until the trapdoor lifts again, and a hand reaches down with a chipped enamel cup of water. The pilot drinks, and he is trembling, and there is somewhere between them a sentence they cannot say out loud. Now that we have started this, none of us can go back. Night falls differently in occupied country. It carries more doors being locked, more dogs discouraged from barking, more candles extinguished at windows, that would otherwise be left open to let the summer out. He listens to the rhythms of it. Tinny radio music somewhere. An argument stopped when it's realized that silence is safer. When he finally emerges, his leg complains of everything he did to it while falling out of the sky. The woman who hit him becomes his first teacher. She is not young. Her hands are stippled with flour and old soap. The lines on her face have grown there, slowly like valleys, carved by slow water. She takes him by the arm and says words he doesn't understand, but her gestures make a grammar of their own. She's telling him what not to touch, when not to look out windows, how to fold his too bright body into the creases of their cautious life. He is one of many. He learns this without needing to be told. The stove is hot with soups from more mouths than the house can hold. There are bedrolls under beds, small bundles by doors, and a stack of cards that the woman's grown daughter arranges like a fortune teller. They are ration cards. Bread, sugar, fuel, salt. The cards are like prayers, worn smooth and ununique, in a town that now measures its days by cues and rumors. The pilot's presence adds weight to the air. The house seems to bend to accommodate it. Another man arrives after dusk, shoulders hunched against the damp. He wears a sweater that has been darned and redarned until it resembles netting. He says he is from the rail yard and knows how to tell a timetable's secrets. He carries a loaf of bread wrapped in yesterday's newspaper. On the second page, there's a photograph of a German general squinting at a map. The paper smells of ink and lies. The man produces from his pocket a crumpled thing, a small red ID card with his photograph and a false name. He looks at the pilot, and then at the woman, and all three stand there in silence, with what is about to be asked hovering between them. When he finally speaks in his careful schoolroom English, it feels like a rope lowered into a well. "We try," he says. "We try to take you, but you must be like us. No eyes, no look, no questions." The pilot nods. He has been taught not to ask questions. Anyone who has done that sort of training knows that questions are like fire. They show you where you are, but the wrong light draws attention you don't want. He says merci, and means thank you, and I am sorry, and tell me how to make this easier all at once. There is, he discovers, a network. In England, it was briefed as a diagram of lines and dots, a small spiderweb in the corner of the big room. In life, it is made of women wearing aprons, boys on bicycles, curates with steady hands, stationmasters with ticks they use as coded signals, dressmakers who fit shirts full of whispers. It begins in this kitchen, and it runs from town to field to farmhouse to barn loft, into taverns where laughter is forced and smoke is plentiful, and through alleys smelling of the sea. It ends in Spain, or at sea with a British boat putting its black hull against a blacker cliff and cutting its engines, while a man with a torch flashes a code that says the dark can be trusted. He becomes a package to be delivered. It is new, and it is humiliating, and it is necessary. The man from the rail yard teaches him how to read a station without looking like he is reading it. You look at shoes. Shoes know a lot. German boots arrive in clusters. They enter spaces like a claim. The shoes of men who are collaborating are better polished than their faces. The shoes of the hungry make a sound like apology. He learns also how to carry nothing. Nothing in your hands so you can put them up quickly. Nothing in your face so you can be forgotten. A wound, however, is not nothing. In a bedroom where a crucifix watches him with a tired dignity, He sits on a chair while a young woman with firm hands peels back the torn fabric and looks at his thigh. Where soap and fire had their way with him, there is angry meat. She cleans it, her eyes on their work rather than on him. She touches him with the seriousness of someone who has held strangers' lives before. He bites down on a strap to keep quiet. Downstairs, the radio whispers a dance tune, and for a moment, the absurdity of everything feels like a balancing act. At dusk, a boy arrives with a bicycle that has seen better ages. He is barely a teenager, but his manner says he has lived long enough already. He fits a French cap onto the pilot's head and a pair of wooden clogs onto his feet. "Marcher comme moi," he says. "Walk like me." The pilot tries. His heels stumble on the slick-down-pat street, on pavements showy with damp. They practice for an hour, the pilot making himself into something he hopes reads as local and uninteresting. The checkpoint is a little stage. Two Germans in caps and theatrically wide leather belts lounge behind a waist-high gate that is chipped where trucks have clouded it. On a crate sits a young French gendarme, not much older than the boy. Their boredom is a smell. The pilot's heart becomes something he drags behind him on a string, like a child's toy. The boy pedals past with a bag of onions tied to his handlebars. The pilot, behind, holds a sack of carrots. He looks at the ground. He counts to keep his face flat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They pass within 3 heartbeats of men who would ruin and everything. A cigarette glows from a lazy hand. The ash grows a long tail and falls. He is waved through, just like that. There is no trumpet. There is only the sensation of air going back into his lungs, like it has been away on vacation. In a barn later, among hay that sticks to sweat, he meets another airman. The man's skin is pale and sweaty, the skin of a person whose body is trying to calm a catastrophe. He is wounded, and the wound is the kind that must be dealt with, or a limb will be lost. The pilot and the woman, and a man with a face like a strike of flint gather close. There is a smell like pennies and iodine. The pilot discovers he's willing to be a medic. He holds down his new friend, whose name is lost to history's bullet points, but whose breath and knuckles are very real right now. He heats a knife in a fire and does a thing he will not forget and does not want to remember. The wounded airman squeezes his shoulder so hard it will be purple later. The Frenchwoman murmurs prayers that seem to harmonize with the crickets. That night he cannot sleep. The barn breathes with animals. He thinks of the 1,000 things that stand between the straw and the white cliffs. He thinks also of the rules. Evaders are told not to fight, not to help beyond keeping themselves alive. They are told that their very presence is a danger to anyone who helps them. But the next day, when a man with a pointed chin and a kink in his ear walks them into a stand of pines where shapes move with the quick hesitations of the hunted, the pilot sees rifles and a spool of wire, and the patient, muscular hope that a cut rail line can express, and he knows he will not be able to remain only cargo. For now, though, he remains as taught, trying to be an unexceptional point, moving through a map that is being folded and unfolded by hands invisible to him. In a cafe where the walls remember laughter, he sits with a cup of coffee that is not coffee, listening to a woman talk about weather, because weather is safer than war. She hands him a sheet of paper with his new name. It is French and plausible, like a coat that almost fits. He practices saying it under his breath, with the accent she coaches into him. He is not good at this. He is a pilot who loves direct lines. Outside, A poster tells the town that a man was shot last week for being the wrong kind of brave. Next to it, a smaller poster announces a ration of coal. The town squares its shoulders under both notices. It appears to him that most courage here happens without anyone talking about it out loud. It accumulates in kitchens, in the way a man at the end of the street looks toward the train station and then deliberately looks away. It accumulates in heads bowed over plates, so nobody asks why there are 2 fewer potatoes than there were last month. The pilot takes off his cap and rests his head against a wall. He is behind enemy lines, yes, but he is also inside a story bigger and older than the wings he flew in on. He can feel it, the old resistance of ordinary people to anyone who wants to press them flat or file off their corners. If he lives, he will be made of this generosity. If he is taken, he will be an empty letter, an unfinished sentence. And now that he knows the other man in the barn cannot travel quickly, he knows what his next sentence will have to include. He will not go without him. The mountains begin as a rumor. In one town they are a purple hum on the horizon. In another, they are a smell of rock and cold that seeps into wool and lungs. Then, after abrasive nights dancing from hayloft to kitchen to church cellar, the Pyrenees arrive all at once, shouldering the sky out of the way like bouncers at a door between 2 worlds. He learns about passeurs, the guides who move in the dark along paths nobody writes down. The first one who looks him over has a profile like the prow of a ship and a half-smile that knows this business too well to flatter either luck or courage. In the flicker of a low fire, the guide examines boots, hands, eyes. He shakes his head at the pilot's clogs and throws a battered pair of leather boots at him. "You will die with those," he says, nodding at the clogs. "You will maybe die with these also, but less." The wounded airman, gray with pain but stubborn, takes his own replacement boots and nods his jaw like a man accepting a difficult bargain. They are both wrapped in shepherd's coats that smell like the animals they came from. Their breath makes clouds that follow them like ghosts. They set out after midnight. The climb is not walking so much as learning new verbs. They crab across slopes. They feel for holds with sticks. They knit themselves into the mountain, one step at a time. Above them, the sky is thick with stars that seem to have multiplied just for tonight. Somewhere below, a dog insists on a complaint, but it is far away now, and then it is gone. The guide moves like water through stone. The pilot breathes an account to trick his fear into regularity. The wounded man lags, then catches, lags, then catches. Each pause is a small argument with gravity and nerve. Their world shrinks to the span of a hand on a rock, the smell of lichen, the scrape of a boot. They make of it a prayer. On a shelf of mountain at dawn, they crouch beneath a fir and eat dark bread with a line of sausage and something from a flask that puts lightning in their stomachs. The guide points with his chin. "There," he says, "Spain. It is just an angle of slope and a line of light that seems the same and yet different. It is a kind of idea." The pilot thinks of an idea being enough to save them. He almost laughs, and then he doesn't, because a new sound is rising. A motorcycle in first gear, grinding up toward a small patrol station. They push into brush and become animals. They learn, in a howl of minutes, how to make themselves into the kind of silence that has weight. An old man with a rifle walks by with the casual cruelty of someone who has had too many bosses. He flicks the cigarette butt toward the brush. It lands sizzling in the damp and dies. He moves on, and the trio's lungs, all three at once, begin again. There is a story that the pilot will tell later, that at a mountain stream, the wounded airman cannot go farther. His leg is a bell-ringing pain through his whole body. The guide flicks his eyes toward the slope behind, where morning is flattening shadows and making their shapes bolder. We cannot, the guide says, and the sentence is a handful of pebbles thrown down a well. The pilot says very quietly, "We don't leave him." The guide looks for a long time and then says, "Then you carry." So he does. He bears the other man over cold like knives. He feels the weight as a kind of vow, not to be heroic, but not to be cruel when kindness is still possible. He slings the man's arm around his shoulder, the way farm boys do when work gets heavy. He takes a step and another, and the mountain does not care, and the sky does not care, but the guide, in that strange economy of the persecuted, begins to care a little more. He shortens his stride. He offers the pilot a hand at a point that does not truly require one. This is how alliances are made. They sleep that afternoon in a shepherd's hut that still remembers summer. In its low doorway, the pilot watches clouds paste and peel from the tips of the range. He feels scoured. His wound flares with every heartbeat. He rewraps it with strips of shirt, careful, clean, and grim. The guide gives him a nod of satisfaction when he does it well. Many airmen, the guide says, do not want to learn. You can learn. The next night the climb continues, and now it includes ice. They move along a ledge so narrow that the mountain seems to be telling them a joke with a very sharp punchline. The wounded man's breath whistles. They reach a call, a place where the mountain puts an arm around the sky, and the wind is a thing with hands. The guide tells them to lie flat and crawl. They do. The earth is granite and humility. The stars approve. When they finally stumble into a riverbed full of round stones, the guide tells them the worst is over. He does not say that the Spanish police will arrest them. He does not say that sometimes the foreigners are sent back into France. He does not say that there will be a prison with a gate that clanks shut with historic finality, because the idea of a neutral country cannot shoulder the whole burden of war's exceptions. He says only, it is dawn. Spain greets them with sun hard as glass. A Guardia Civil patrol finds them asleep under brush that is trying too hard to pretend it is a bed. They are pointed, herded, and then ushered into an army that does not fight this war with guns, but with stamps and offices and the institutional talent for losing important pieces of paper. The pilot is interned. The prison smells of disinfectant and oranges. Men from everywhere sit on bunk boards telling half-stories and shared words. There is a British man who used to sell screws in a port, and who somehow knows everyone they will need. There is an American who is learning Spanish and keeps saying "manana" with an optimism that makes the pilot laugh for the first time in weeks. He expects fear to flood him again. Instead, he feels something softer and more dangerous: relief. He allows himself to sleep without jerk starts. He eats soup and does not measure it for a child that is not in the room. He looks at the wounded man, whose color is returning like sunrise. They are alive. They are still packages in a way, but now on a different conveyor belt, one that will take them north and west, not east. It is still not simple. The Spanish have rules that feel like parables. But someone has spoken to someone who has spoken to someone, and after a while, there is a car ride toward a city that smells like old grandfathers and the sea. The British consulate has a door like a thick book. Inside, A man with a mustache and a tie that has seen too many hurried breakfasts looks them over with an emotion he puts away as soon as it arrives. He pours tea like it is proof of life and slides forms across a desk that is scarred with survival. He speaks in a voice designed to reassure. He is not the last person to insist, carefully, that the pilot's memory be sifted and examined. Names are asked for and refused, and not only because the pilot can't always pronounce them, but because no one who lived through the chain of kindness wants a name spoken into the wrong ear. This is the part of the war where memory becomes a weapon and a responsibility. From Spain to Gibraltar to Britain is a line drawn with care by hands trained for it. The rock rises like a clenched fist out of the sea. The pilot sees British uniforms and hears English spoken without the war in it for the first time in weeks. He strips and is deloused and is given new clothes that fit like hope. He is fed and debriefed and given the one thing any evader craves, a conversation in which he doesn't have to measure every word in advance. He cries once, briefly, in a room he will never see again, and nobody says anything, which is the right thing not to say. He writes a letter to the girl whose name the plane bore. He writes as if the words themselves could prove to her that he is still the person who got into that cockpit. He does not tell her everything. He cannot. Words do not have that much room. The ship for England sails when weather and order say it can. He stands on the deck and watches the sea he crossed months ago from the other side. He breathes with his whole chest for perhaps the first time since it happened. Behind him, somewhere far inland, a woman in a kitchen scrubs a pot in water that has become a luxury. A man with a wry eye swings himself onto a bicycle and tries not to think about prison. A boy in wooden clogs rides his way to a cousin's farm with a note in his pocket. The pilot is leaving. They remain. This is one of the harsh arithmetic facts of his life now. As the shore rises with white on its edge, someone standing beside him says, "Back to the war." The pilot nods, and the knowledge that he is going back settles on his shoulders the way a pack does. He does not yet know the argument he will have to make to get back to his cockpit. He does not yet know that he will walk into a room with a general whose job is to count things like planes and men and chances and say, "I went down behind enemy lines, and people risked and spent their lives for me. Let me spend mine." He looks at the sea and thinks about mountains. England is a hush of hedgerows, train whistles, and gray skies that change their minds twice an hour. It is also briefings rooms where the air feels almost smoky with the accumulated hope and dread of everyone who has recently left for a mission. The pilot steps back into it with a shock of familiarity that is also a kind of vertigo. Everything looks the same. Nothing is the same. At the debrief center, they call it an interview, but it is sharper than that. The walls are bland, the chairs ordinary, and the questions patient with the patience of professionals who know lives are in the details. My 9 wants to know which route, which border stones, which priest, which hairdresser, which term caller. He says what he can say. He leaves out what he must. He will not cannot put those kitchens, those hands, on a list anyone can find. The men across from him understand. They have read too many reports. They have seen networks chewed apart by a name carelessly spoken, and an arrest made with bureaucratic neatness at dawn. There is also this, the rule. Evaders should not fly over occupied territory again. If caught, their knowledge would be a contagion. The pilot nods when it is explained, and then feels the nod turning in him into something hot and disobedient. He has left a piece of himself under a table in a French kitchen. He has learned a thing about debt that makes it impossible for him to consider sitting the rest of the war out at a desk. He wants no. He needs to go back into the air. That desire is not just for glory, though he is susceptible to the kind of ambition that a 21-year-old wearing wings is allowed. It is for a kind of completion. To return to flight will make the narrative less of a cliffhanger and more of a bridge. His commanding officer is sympathetic and bound by rules. The pilot is a man who has always had a directness in him. This is why he flew fighters to begin with. He says he will take it higher. He is told that higher is very high indeed. Then the pilot does a thing that people later will retell, because it says something simple and enormous about him. He asks to see the general. When that doesn't work, he asks to see the supreme commander. The room is unpretentious. The man in it is Eisenhower without fanfare, the way a family man is still a father without a tie, and his presence takes form not as an aura, but as a call. The pilot sets his hat on his knee and speaks plainly. He tells how he went down, what it was like being the package moving through hands he didn't deserve. He says that if he is grounded, he will go mad. He says that nobody on the other side is going to get names out of him because he won't be taken alive. It is a statement that isn't bravado so much as clarity. He says that he owes that kid on the bicycle and the year in a woman's face and a mountain that let him by. He says he wants to spend whatever is left of his luck and skill on the thing he knows how to do. The Supreme Commander listens. He has eyes that have learned to look for sincerity, because the war keeps trying to sell him men who talk too easily. He sees in this kid from West Virginia a pilot who is straightforward to the point of stubbornness. He sees also the value of returning men like him to the line. A policy is a good thing until it isn't. War keeps puncturing paperwork. He says yes, with the caveat that does not need to be said. Do not get caught. Back at station, the other pilots pretend not to stare. He is the one who fell out of the sky and reappeared. They clap him on the shoulder. They tell him it's good to see his ugly face. They say, with an ease made of superstition and affection, that now he's used his ration of luck. He smiles like a man who has walked out of a farmhouse because there was a knock at the door and into a night where the air had weight. He climbs back into a Mustang, and the cockpit fits him like a memory made of metal and discipline. He runs his hand along the throttle and thinks of kneading dough. He checks everything twice in a methodical ritual whose comfort is mathematical. The Merlin grumbles, coughs, and then sings the song that is one part roar and one part aspirated rush, the song of air being chopped into survival. He taxis and takes off and feels the shiver of the airframe when wheels fold away. He has re-entered the world he left when the sky caught fire. They call him aggressive and precise. He calls what he is doing his job. He is told to escort bombers. He watches the enemy try to tear them apart. He finds angles. He is the sort of pilot who loves geometry and luck in equal measure, who finds beyond any language his own exact place in a fluid, deadly equation. He is also now a man who looks down and thinks of kitchens and barns. He flies with a second altitude inside him. His aggression is tempered by a strange, implicit gratitude, though it does not soften his hand on the trigger. If anything, it makes him harder to shake, because he knows something about the costs on the ground. The day he smashes 5 enemy fighters out of the sky in one mission, making him an ace in a day, He hits a rhythm that feels like stepping stones across a fast river. The fight is an untidy tangle of aircraft and trajectories and decisions that are so small they cannot be seen from the ground. 2 degrees here, a glance across a shoulder that sees opportunity. He lays the sight on a Messerschmitt and squeezes, the whole plane a claw and a thought. He pitches and drags the sky across his canopy to find the next target. He does not cheer, he works. Later, when the adrenaline moves out, he will sit quietly, and a thought will arrive unbidden. Child feet in wooden clogs on a road, moving past a checkpoint, faster than fear could gather itself. Later still, he will catch a jet, a Me-262, fast as rumor and proud with futurity. He will do it in the simplest way over the field, when it is most vulnerable. He will say, in a voice so flat it counts as modesty, that he just got lucky and was where he should be. He is not trying to be a sportsman. He is trying to end a war. In quiet hours, in the mess and in the little adjacent world of the squadron, he tells stories to men who keep their own fears on short leashes. He speaks about the people who hid him and the way the world gets very local when you are prey. He keeps the names like pearls he refuses to bring into daylight. He talks about a mountain stream like a knife, and about the doctoring of a wound with a blade heated over a scared, small fire. He does not romanticize. He gives off a sense of having seen something inside this war that is more tender than the average and more ruthless. A few of his squadron mates, men who trade jokes like coins, look at him differently, as if he came back with a map they can't quite read. The war shifts. The ground moves. The front that used to be compressed into maps is now enormous and rolling. On leave in London, he finds himself in places where a barwoman's laugh is a kind of bandage. He is stopped by civilians who have not had enough sleep since 1940. He does not tell them his worries, because theirs are the kind that stand in queues and measure sugar in teaspoons. In another office, more debriefs. It is the way of this life. Fly, land, report, plan, and try not to think about the one who did not come back. He is shot at more times than anyone should have to count. Flak still does not care about Mustangs. He thinks of nights when he was a package moving across a kitchen table, and hopes he will not become a headline in a small column in an American paper that tells mothers the morning after their dreams were undone. When the end begins to hove into view, it does so like a big ship contracting the sea around it. The signs arrive. The radio crackle changes tone. The briefings start to include sentences like, "They're running," and the sky over Germany becomes full of smoke that means something is breaking in a way that is permanent. He does not cheer too soon. He has waited in cellars. He has learned that endings are tricky. In the last months, after too many missions and too many nights where platoons of ghosts march through his sleep, he thinks about how the line between one life and another is sometimes a knock at the door, sometimes a jag of fire, sometimes a man at a desk saying you can, or you cannot. He thinks of how hard it is to make your body believe that safety has arrived when your brain is still combing airfields for threats. Then it is over. The word arrives with a weight and a hollowness that are out of proportion to its size. He stands on a tarmac that smells of oil and spring and hears no one trying to kill anybody for a whole hour. He looks up, and the sky is just a sky. Years have a way of compressing into a sentence. He will later be known for another sky. He will ride a different engine through an invisible wall and listen to a sound that changed the way humans talk about speed. But when he thinks about what made any of it possible, he returns to kitchens and mountain paths and the delicate, muscular lattice of people who decided that they would not look away from a stranger's fear. Stories like his tend to harden into myth because we are profoundly sentimental about survival. We want there to be a lesson that is clear and portable. But if you sit with the work of memory long enough, what emerges is something less tidy and more human. It is the knowledge that a war is made up not only of 1,000 maps and orders and factories, but of 1,000 decisions an hour by people lined up at bread counters and waiting at country bus stops, people who had every reason not to take a risk and who took it anyway. The pilot's name is famous in ways he never asked for. The names he carries are not. They exist in the secret archive that is carried by everyone who has ever been smuggled across a border or hidden in a larder. The historian in you wants numbers, and there are numbers that astonish if you think about them too long. Thousands of Allied airmen fell behind enemy lines over the continent. More than 2,000 would find their way back to Britain through evasion routes that braided lanes and fields into rescue lines, drawn by bakers and teachers, farmers and students. One network, spun out of Brussels by a young woman whose belief in decency was both naive and absolutely unsentimental, shepherded hundreds to Spain before it was smashed. Hundreds of its members were arrested and many killed. Another, strung along the rocky pockets of the Brittany coast, learned to listen to the sea's moods and time their torch signals to the exact beat of waves. The price of every successful crossing was paid many times over in arrests, interrogations, and the terrible half-knowledge that eats at the families left behind. For airmen like him who went back to flying, the calculus included all of that. Imagine, you have been the beneficiary of a gift that could never be repaid, and yet you decide, or are allowed, to step once more into a position where ruin would not simply end you, but potentially crush the people who saved you. The argument that got him back into combat was not a piece of rhetoric. It was a statement about responsibility that carried within it an understanding of the other side's courage. When he said, "I won't be caught again," it wasn't swagger. It was a vow made from the memory of a cellar's cold and the taste of water offered in a chipped enamel cup. He flew, he fought, he lived. The war ended, and his life did not go to quiet ground. But if you look carefully, you can see the trace of those weeks behind the German line in the way he moved through the rest of his life. There is a frankness to him that reads as unafraid. There is also a seam of gratitude that doesn't do much talking. He knew what it was to be reduced to the size of a heartbeat and the next footfall. He knew that a kitchen table could be a barricade against the darkness, that a bicycle could be a life raft, that a woman's steady hand could compete with the war gods and sometimes win. There are ways to tell this story that would make his courage the whole of it. It isn't the thing that lets him be the title of our film, the pilot who went down behind enemy lines and survived, isn't only his fight with physics over a field in France or his stubbornness on a mountain. It's the wiring together of dozens of lives that decided to risk being broken to make him whole. Every time he looked at a map in an operations trailer again, every time he sat with other pilots and planned a sweep, he was making decisions with the knowledge of that behind him, in front of him, inside him. The cliff at the shore in Brittany, where a boat once idled in the dark. The headland in the Basque Country, where a farmhouse offered a smuggler's code wrapped in wool. The shabby office in Gibraltar, where a man wearily wrote the same form again, because saving lives can be as monotonous as any factory work. The wood-paneled room in London where clever, exhausted people turned stories into roots. The arched bridges of Paris, under which couriers pedaled with baskets of bread, under a sky that was not bombed today. All of it forms a second map. It is the map of moral geography, and it is the one that, once you see it, never disappears. If you go looking for the boy with the wooden clogs, you may not find him. If you hunt for the woman who lowered him into the root cellar, you may not reach her before the year's due. If you ask after the guide who rolled his eyes at those clogs and handed over boots that were just as likely to kill you, you will be given a shrug into which the fatigue of a generation has settled. But if you visit a small village that still keeps its church open during the day, and there is a brass plaque with a list of names from 1942 or 1943, if you walk out to the graveyard and read stones that do not belong to old men, you will be closer to the people who made his survival possible than any archive can carry you. The pilot is gone now, in the way men go when their bodies cannot close the circle they drew so widely in youth. But his story remains insistent. It asks us to remember that the most cinematic scenes in wars are often those that no camera saw. The quiet handoff of a false identity card in a cafe where the radio hums. A farmhouse staircase creaking under the weight of people who must become invisible. A shepherd weighing 3 strangers with his eyes and deciding he will carry the risk up the mountain for them. There is a tendency, when remembering, to place the light on the faces that are easiest to recognize. This film asks that you shift the lamp a little. Let it fall also on the fretful, practical, unsentimental courage of ordinary people, and on the professionals who did what needed doing without calling attention to themselves. The pilot's name can stay in your mouth. Let the others' names, anonymous by necessity, rest in your chest like a certain kind of gravity. When you feel it, you are less likely to let the next crisis turn everyone into a caricature, hero or victim, villain or fool, and more likely to see the weave of responsibility that stitches together the possibility of survival. What happened to him after the war barriers broken faster than sound coarseness against the air makes a neat third act. It is tempting to end on that because it confirms some idea we have about heroes becoming inevitable. Resist that tidiness. Let the first act be the one we keep returning to. A man falls out of a burning plane into a field he cannot name, into a set of decisions made by people he will never meet again. He is terrified, he is patient, he is stubborn, and he is loved by strangers. He survives because that is what dozens of people he has never met decide will happen. There's a responsibility that comes with hearing a story like this. You might never be asked to hide someone in your cellar while a boot heel tests your front step. You might never feel the slow, resigned defiance of walking past a checkpoint with a bundle of carrots hiding a note. But you will, inevitably, be presented with a choice about whether to make someone else's safety your concern. In that moment, remember a boy in clogs and a woman with flour on her hands, and a guide who handed over his precious boots. Remember a pilot whose luck ran out, and then was remade for him by hands he did not know. We tell this story not to look backward with sentiment, but forward with responsibility. Behind enemy lines will always exist, sometimes in places where no map marks them. Survival will always be, in part, a communal verb. And the next time you are invited to be part of the network that makes it possible for someone else to move forward, consider this. The quiet heroism of ordinary people is what gives the extraordinary any chance at all.